I'm after your response to Keir Starmer's reaction, his own verdict on his first 6 months in office, which was essentially just that, no regrets. I suppose all of us in the media got our chance to steam in after his first month in Downing Street, then again to mark the first 100 days of this new Labour government. So I suppose it's kind of fair that the main man should get a chance. And hey, it's Christmas, right? But if his disappointed supporters, let alone the legions of Starmer's political critics, were expecting a teeny tiny modicum of mea culpa, well, they were in for disappointment. Starmer wrapped up his working year with an appearance in front of the Commons Liaison Committee, chaired by the formidable Labour MP Heale. And after facing a broad range of questions from its members on everything from overcrowded prisons to defence spending and immigration, I would suggest it was the Prime Minister's response to Heale's own questions at the end of the session that were by far the most revealing. Heale ended the session by asking this.
Is there anything that you would do differently if you were starting out now?
No, we had to do tough stuff. We're getting on with it, and I'm very pleased to be delivering from a position of power rather than going around the division lobbies losing every night. I've had too much of that.
Of course, Heale didn't ask for any of that, and after not responding to her question sort of once in any detail, she asked it again, is there anything you'd have done differently? And he went on and did all the tough stuff there that he's pleased to be delivering. So, dear listener, a few questions for you, really. Am I alone in thinking that Starmer's responses there were arrogant at best and at worst deluded? Because I've been around long enough to know how modern politicians appear to struggle with simple, direct questions. And I'm also aware of that mantra adopted by many powerful people, like the royal family: never complain, never explain. Except Starmer has complained non-stop about the terrible inheritance left to him by Sunak, Truss, Johnson, May et al. So if we've had the complaining, maybe a little bit more explaining would be welcome. Because over the last nigh on 6 months now, I've spoken to loads of Labour-friendly commentators, many of whom have voiced concerns about Starmer's direction of travel, from his attacks on the pensioners, his threats towards benefit claimants, you remember the other day, the Louise Hay P&O debacle, turning his back on the WASPI pensioners and so on. Even loyal Labour supporters have voiced concerns on this show about the party's poor messaging, its inability to communicate its ideas with the very people who voted for them. And I'm just left wondering this morning whether a little bit of mea culpa from the Prime Minister on any of those issues, well, would they have made Starmer look weak? Is that what he was worried about? Is that why he won't acknowledge he's made any mistakes at all? I suppose it's possible Starmer really does think that there isn't a single thing he could have done better. I mean, maybe he doesn't believe there's a single thing he got wrong. The Labour-supporting Guardian reckons Starmer simply refused to offer any thoughts on doing things differently to avoid the inevitable negative headlines that a more honest answer might have attracted. But even allowing for a fact that a poll distributed on TikTok showing Starmer as the most unpopular sitting Prime Minister ever was fake news, and I think it's Sunak who actually still holds that record, Starmer's approval rating has gone through the floor in his first 5 months in office. He's minus 33 in a YouGov study I saw the other day, which does suggest, to this mind at least, at this time of year, that a little less arrogance from Starmer and a lot more humility might have served him better. 0345 606 973 is the number for your thoughts. I'm thinking of all those pensioners, the WASPI women, and anybody else who may have just feel that Labour isn't communicating. I mean, would it have been such a terrible thing for the Prime Minister to say, Meg, I do regret that we didn't get the Labour message over clearly enough. And a statement like that isn't really admitting anything at all, really. I mean, you're still pushing Labour statements, but it would have at least showed a tiny quantum of humility. And I think that would serve him well right now. But I may be wrong. Give us a call with your thoughts. I'm turning for guidance first to the political correspondent at the Spectator, James Heale. Good morning to you, James.
Morning, Matthew.
It's the never complain, never explain does dominate a lot of thinking amongst the powerful. Is that what you think may be going on here?
I think Keir Starmer sort of sees these occasions as more damage limitation than opportunities to be exploited, rather than be a politician like, say, Tony Blair, who might, try and explain his message better, they're very much more ones in which he sort of wants to get in and get out, I'd say. And that, therefore, I think what his answer was a determination not to commit, in his eyes, the cardinal sin of committing news. And actually, he was not going to give anything, not to give anything to his critics. He was determined to say, nope, we've got nothing wrong, absolutely nothing whatsoever. And I think, actually, of course, that is completely implausible. And you've just been saying, you talk to Labour advisors, you talk to Labour sympathisers. No one could say the first 5 months have gone swimmingly well. They've had to sack the Chief of Staff after less than 100 days. They've had the approval ratings collapse to a record level. They have made mistakes, and perhaps a more fleet of foot Prime Minister would be able to say, look, I've learned, it's been a learning experience, but we're looking forward to getting things better in the future.
You made me laugh, but actually it's not that funny. The idea that he was terrified of making the sort of cardinal mistake of producing news, which is, one might argue, the inverse of what he should be doing, which is to try and find opportunities to make news, positive news, about Labour's agenda.
I completely agree with that. And I think actually that determination to not admit anything approaching failure actually creates the opposite effect. I was chatting to someone after the liaison committee, and they said their appearance could be summarised in 4 words: je ne regrette rien. Yeah. And it didn't work for Norman Lamont, famously 30 years ago after Black Wednesday, and I don't think it's going to particularly work in the future for Keir Starmer, because everyone knows that politicians make mistakes, and certainly this has not been a vintage start for Labour. And so the danger is you then look implausible and out of touch, and as you say, Matthew, you can't bring people with you, because the public are willing to be led somewhere, willing to understand, I think, but having such a flat non-answer, I think, actually leads to more questions rather than shuts up the critics.
Can I ask, if he had held his hand up to anything, the Fourth Estate would have turned on him anyway. So I'm just trying to work out on balance whether there is a view that he could have done the right thing. That I'm here discussing that it wasn't the most inspiring or reassuring speech from someone, I suppose, who's broadly sympathetic to his ambitions. There's not much in the papers. I mean, there's next to nothing about him in the papers. So maybe he feels that's a win, as opposed to me standing and saying, there's a story, Keir Starmer regrets axing pensioners' winter fuel allowance, something like that. That maybe he considers this a win.
I think there'll be someone down the street who say that. I would say, though, that I think this is going to be the easiest of these sessions, the liaison committee he's going to have. I mean, some of the questioning was just deferential. It was Tandesi, the Defence Select Committee chairman, began by thanking him for his public service. So I just wonder that perhaps if he carries on with this in the future, that's going to lead to further headaches down the line, particularly when select committees fall more emboldened, particularly when he can't just say, it's all about the inheritance I had. So when he takes more ownership for that, as events, and we'll have to force that in future. I think there'll be that element, and I just think perhaps that a more commanding Prime Minister might have been able to handle it with a bit lack of a fleet of foot, shall we say?
It's interesting you started the conversation with Tony Blair, James, because I'm going to love and leave you, wish you a happy Christmas, and go straight over to John McTernan, a former political secretary to Tony Blair. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
James was quite flattering there that he felt your man was very adroit at dealing with these things, and that perhaps Keir Starmer could have learned a lesson, a little bit of mea culpa, a bit of humility. What are your thoughts, John?
I don't think the meeting laid a hand on him, really, and I think it's actually true that this the liaison committee tends to be en masse far weaker than individual committees are together, because they have to share the questions, and they've not really developed a collective tone for themselves. Look, I think your comment at the end was exactly right. There's nothing in the papers today, and Keir governs at a time when the fragmented media landscape means that I think the newspapers, legacy media, are more anxious to get a story because they see themselves being beaten by, like you said, sometimes fake news like that, the story on TikTok, or you have to get a story. And what the government needs to do, what the Prime Minister needs to do, is actually understand the landscape. I think they do, but also occasionally say, look what we've done. We've renationalised the railways. We've reformed planning. We stopped Rwanda. We've announced £22 billion extra spending for the NHS. All really big things.
Yeah.
And it's almost the accumulation of the actions. And, they need some kind of mantra that lists and does, what really a modern version of what have the Romans ever done for us, what has Starmer ever done for us. There's been quite a lot of action in the first 6 months, and I'm not surprised people are grumpy, because every incumbent government in the year, apart from a couple, have lost the elections they stood in. When you become the new government in the middle of the year, people don't just go, great, it all changed, fantastic. Yeah. They just go, you're the government now. Now we're going to blame you. Yeah. I think it's the long, hard work of change that will make a difference.
What you felt about the tone, really, I suppose. I agree with everything you said about the sort of the fractured media, the behaviour of the Fourth Estate. But even allowing for the fact that the media landscape is fractured, there is an overriding tone that kicked off, I would say, way too early in the government, of them being on the back foot, that it's everything, that despite all the positives that you listed, there's this sort of overarching feeling that we're sort of going through austerity again. It's all going to be quite tough. We're totally dependent on growth. It's all quite gloomy. And after 6 months in the, less than a week from Christmas, that just a little bit of humanity, maybe, rather than humility from Keir, to acknowledge that, I think would have gone a long way. But maybe the Fourth Estate, that's what they're waiting for. I don't know, but it feels like the overarching tone for the government is negative.
Look, I think the overarching world is actually quite negative. I've spoken to senior journalists, around the world. And I don't think anybody's seen a world with so many challenges, whether it's climate crisis, it's the Middle East, Ukraine, the South China Sea, AI, the scale, the environment, climate crisis, so many different things are just massive, huge issues. And the government has to go, we're going to work on these bit by bit by bit, either in partnership, either directly. But the story, the context in which people are, they look around them and they go, I can't see this getting better for my kids. Young people look around it and go, can I afford a house? Can I afford the rent? And in the end, the feelings people have, the feelings of American voters overwhelmed Kamala Harris's really excellent campaign and Joe Biden's excellent record as president. So you have to be careful about offering messages that actually clash with how people feel. Okay. And the proof is really, do we feel better in 4 or 5 years after this? Because in 4 or 5 years, we'll still only have had one Prime Minister, whereas the last 4 or 5 years we've had 5 or 6.
John, got to leave it there. John McTernan, lovely talking to you. Have a Merry Christmas as well. As I got the sense from talking to John, he shares my view that there is this sort of overarching negative feel about the government. Whether or not I'm right to think that Starmer had an opportunity to address that and missed it, well, that's for you to say. 0345 606 097.